The massive crystalline dome of the Grand Assembly Hall stretched high above, its transparent panels revealing the swirling nebula and distant stars beyond. Inside, hundreds of beings from across the Galactic Alliance gathered in rising tiers of seats, their attention fixed on the central platform where Admiral Daho Park stood. The Admiral's normally pristine white uniform showed signs of recent battle, scorch marks on the sleeve, a tear near the collar. His face, bearing the marks of advanced age-slowing treatments that had kept him in service for centuries, was drawn with exhaustion. The holographic displays floating around him painted his features in harsh reds and blues as they showed the devastating losses their forces had suffered. "The Centauri sector has fallen," he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the perfect acoustics of the chamber. The images shifted, showing the systematic destruction of their defense platforms and the overwhelming force of the Vex Dominion's latest assault. "Their battle computers outthink our best tactical AIs at every turn. Our losses in the last engagement were total." A murmur of despair rippled through the assembled representatives. Species that had been at war with each other for millennia before joining the Alliance now sat together, united in their fear of the Vex threat. The Vex, with their perfectly logical battle computers and ever-evolving strategies, had proven unstoppable. Commander Jai-Wan Lee stood at attention beside the Admiral, her knuckles white, as she gripped the edge of the circular command table. The latest tactical data scrolled across her neural implants, each new report worse than the last. "They adapt to everything," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "Every strategy we deploy, they analyze and counter within hours. Traditional warfare is useless against them." The assembled council members began talking all at once, their voices rising in panic. Some called for surrender, others for a final, desperate stand. The Vex had already conquered 3 major systems in the past month alone. Their advance seemed unstoppable. It was Council Member Hae-Nul Kim who brought silence to the chamber. She rose slowly from her seat in the front row, her silver ceremonial robes catching the light from the holographic displays. Unlike most of the Alliance species who had evolved beyond the need for biological eyes, she still bore the silver eyes of her people, enhanced with subtle cybernetics that gave them their metallic sheen. "There are stories," she said, her voice soft but carrying clearly through the sudden quiet. The holographic displays reflected in her eyes as she spoke, giving them an almost hypnotic quality. "Stories of a species from a gravity well world, a world we have watched but never contacted. They call themselves humans." The silence deepened. Every being in the chamber knew of Earth. It was listed in the Alliance databases as a protected zone, a world deemed too primitive for contact. Their technology was centuries behind the Alliance standard. They hadn't even established permanent colonies beyond their own solar system. But there were other stories about humans, stories that had spread through the Alliance over the years, stories of a species that had spent its entire history fighting itself, developing ways of warfare that seemed primitive but somehow unpredictable. Stories of battles won against impossible odds, of strategies that defied conventional logic, of a kind of thinking that was fundamentally different from the logical progression of Alliance military doctrine. Admiral Daho Park turned slowly to face Hae-Nul Kim. The weight of centuries seemed to press down on his shoulders as he considered her words. The humans were primitives by Alliance standards. Their ships would be hopelessly outmatched against Vex technology. Their weapons were crude, their tactics unsophisticated by galactic standards. But they were different. They thought differently. They fought differently. And right now, different was exactly what they needed. "Contact them," Daho ordered, his voice firm with sudden decision. The command table hummed as he entered the authorization codes to break the non-contact protocols. "We have nothing left to lose." As the order went out, he looked up through the crystal dome at the distant stars. Somewhere out there, on a blue planet circling an unremarkable yellow star, was their last hope. He only prayed they would be willing to help. The assembly erupted into chaos again, but this time there was a current of hope running through the panic. They had tried everything else. Perhaps it was time to try something primitive, something unpredictable, something human. Little did they know that this decision would change the course of galactic history forever. The Alliance ship Starweaver slipped out of fold space in a flash of blue light, emerging silently near Earth's moon. The massive diplomatic vessel dwarfed the primitive satellites and space stations that dotted Earth's orbit. Captain Sun Ma-cho watched the blue planet through the bridge's viewing portal, her expression a mixture of hope and doubt. "It's so primitive," one of her officers whispered, watching a human spacecraft slowly orbit below them. The vessel burned chemical fuel, technology that had been obsolete for thousands of years in the rest of the galaxy. Sun Ma remained silent, remembering the desperate faces of the Alliance Council. Primitive or not, they needed help. She turned to where cultural specialist Tai-Yong Kang was reviewing his notes one final time. For months, his team had studied human broadcasts and transmissions, learning their languages and customs. "Are you ready?" she asked him. Tai-Yong nodded, though his hands fidgeted with his translator device. "Their military structure is interesting. They maintain multiple separate armed forces, even though they're all one species. They seem almost obsessed with combat scenarios. The humans had detected them. Of course, their primitive sensors might not understand what they were seeing, but they could certainly see the massive ship near their moon. Within hours, signals began arriving. First cautious attempts at communication, then more focused messages once Tai-Yong's team began responding. The first physical meeting was arranged in a place called Geneva. The Starweaver's shuttle descended through Earth's atmosphere, its advanced shields handling the heat of re-entry with ease. Below them, the city spread out along a lake, its architecture a strange mix of old and new that characterized much of human construction. The United Defense Council met them in a high-security facility. Sun Ma had expected fear, panic, or at least awe from these humans encountering advanced alien life for the first time. Instead, she found herself facing a room full of eager military officers who seemed more interested in their tactical displays than their alien visitors. General Min-ji Choi, a compact woman with sharp eyes and quick movements, immediately took control of the meeting. "Show us everything you have on their battle tactics," she demanded, studying the holographic display of Vex battle formations with intense focus. Tai-Yong began the presentation they had prepared, showing the devastating losses the Alliance had suffered. To the cultural specialist's surprise, the humans began talking excitedly among themselves, pointing out patterns in the Vex movements that the Alliance's most advanced tactical computers had somehow missed. "Look at this formation here," Min-ji said, freezing one of the battle displays. "They're using a classic pincer movement, just adapted for three-dimensional space. And here, see how they always maintain perfect spacing. That's A thinking. Too perfect, too predictable." Sun Ma watched in confusion as the humans gathered around the display, their excitement growing. These primitives, who had never fought a battle in deep space, who had never encountered advanced AI warfare, were seeing things that the Alliance's best strategists had missed. "You're fighting them like they're a conventional force," Min-ji explained, turning to face the Alliance representatives. "That's your first mistake. You're trying to match their precision, their efficiency. But war isn't about efficiency. It's about chaos, adaptation, and unpredictability." Other human officers began adding their observations. They pointed out vulnerabilities in Vex formations that relied too heavily on perfect timing. They suggested ways to disrupt the enemy's sensor networks. They even proposed using the Alliance's advanced technology in ways that had never occurred to its creators. Sun Ma felt a growing sense of hope as she watched. These humans didn't think like the Alliance races. They didn't see battle as a mathematical equation to be solved. They saw it as something organic, chaotic, and fundamentally unpredictable. "We'll help you," Min-ji announced finally, her eyes gleaming with what Sun Ma could only describe as excitement. "But you'll have to let us do things our way. No more fighting by the book. No more predictable tactics. It's time to show these Vex what human warfare really looks like. As the meeting continued deep into the Earth night, Sun Mai sent a message back to the Alliance Council. First contact successful. Humans expressing strong interest in military cooperation. Warning, their methods are unconventional, but they may be exactly what we need. Looking at the eager faces of the human military leaders as they continued to dissect Vex battle tactics, Sun Mai realized that perhaps primitive wasn't the right word for humans after all. Different, yes. Unconventional, certainly. But there was nothing primitive about the gleam of tactical understanding in their eyes. The Alliance had come looking for help from a primitive species. Instead, they had found teachers who might just change everything they thought they knew about warfare. The Global Military Strategy Center in Seoul rose like a gleaming spire above the city skyline. Inside its secure briefing room, Admiral Jun Ho-song stood before a diverse group of Alliance representatives, their alien features showing various signs of discomfort as they watched historical footage of Earth's wars playing across the massive screens. This, Jun Ho said, pausing the display on an image of ancient Vietnamese fighters emerging from hidden tunnels, is what we call guerrilla warfare. Fighting from the shadows, striking where the enemy least expects it. The Alliance representatives shifted uneasily in their seats. Tai Yong, their cultural specialist, leaned forward with fascination as Jun Ho moved through the presentation. The Admiral's uniform was crisp and precise, but his eyes held the intense focus of someone who had spent a lifetime studying the art of war. Your ships are impressive, Jun Ho continued, switching to footage of recent Alliance battles. Your weapons are beyond anything we've developed. But you fight like everyone expects you to fight. You form perfect battle lines. You follow established tactical doctrines. In war, being predictable means being dead. He brought up new images, tanks hidden under camouflage nets, soldiers in ghillie suits disappearing into forests, submarines lurking beneath the waves. Humans learned long ago that superior technology doesn't guarantee victory. Sometimes, the clever rabbit defeats the powerful tiger. One of the Alliance officers, a tall being with iridescent scales, raised a hand. But surely with our advanced targeting systems and battle computers, such primitive concealment would be useless. Jun Ho smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Let me show you something else. He switched to footage of a military exercise where human forces had disabled an entire mechanized division using targeted electromagnetic pulses. Technology can be turned against itself. The more advanced the system, the more ways it can fail. The briefing continued for hours. Jun Ho showed them how humans had developed cyber warfare, turning enemy systems against themselves. He explained psychological operations, the art of breaking an enemy's will to fight. Each new concept seemed to disturb the Alliance representatives more than the last. This is not honorable combat, one of them protested after watching footage of a sabotage operation. Honor is for duels. Jun Ho replied calmly. War is about survival. When your enemy has superior technology, superior numbers, and superior position, you don't fight fair. You fight smart. Tai Yong watched his fellow Alliance members struggle with these concepts. Their civilization had evolved beyond many of the conflicts that had shaped human history. They had forgotten, or perhaps never learned, the desperate creativity that came from fighting against superior forces. Jun Ho brought up a new simulation, showing how a small force could disrupt a larger one through carefully planned deception. Your Vex enemies think like machines, logically, predictably. But humans? We're chaos incarnate. We're unpredictable. We'll try strategies that make no logical sense, and sometimes those are the strategies that work. The Admiral walked among the Alliance representatives, his voice growing more intense. You've been fighting a conventional war against an unconventional enemy. But humans, we've spent our entire history fighting unconventional wars. We've learned to turn weakness into strength, to make our enemies' power work against them. He showed them plans for modifying Alliance ships with human-designed countermeasures, simple solutions that their advanced civilization had never considered. chaff dispensers to confuse sensors, electronic warfare suites to disrupt communications, even old-fashioned physical armor in critical areas. Sometimes, Jun-Ho explained, pointing to a particularly complex deception strategy, the best technology is no technology at all. Sometimes, the most effective weapon is the enemy's own assumptions. As the briefing concluded, Tai Yong noticed something remarkable. The initial discomfort of his fellow Alliance members had been replaced by something else: hope. These primitive humans, with their crude weapons and unconventional tactics, had shown them possibilities they had never imagined. "We'll need to modify our ships," one of the Alliance commanders said, already making notes. "Adapt our strategies. Train our crews in these new methods." Jun-Ho nodded approvingly. "We'll help you, but you'll have to unlearn a lot of what you think you know about warfare. Are you ready for that?" Looking at the determined faces around him, Tai Yong realized that they were ready. The Alliance had come to Earth expecting to find primitive allies. Instead, they had found teachers who could show them a whole new way of thinking about war. As the group filed out of the briefing room, Jun-Ho's words echoed in Tai Yong's mind. Predictability is death in warfare. The Vex were about to learn just how unpredictable humans could be. The massive Alliance battleship hung in space near Jupiter, its crystalline hull reflecting the distant sunlight. Inside its main training hall, Colonel Yoon-hee Baek stood before a group of Alliance officers, her small frame dwarfed by their varied alien forms. A holographic display showed their latest training exercise, a complete disaster by Alliance standards, but exactly what she had wanted to see. "You're still thinking too cleanly," she said, replaying the simulation. "Look here, when the enemy targeted your main drives, you tried to power through their attack pattern. Instead, you should have killed your own engines and used Jupiter's gravity to slingshot past them." One of the Alliance officers, a towering being with crystalline features, looked confused. "But that would have left us vulnerable for 3.7 standard minutes." Yoon-hee smiled. "Exactly. Sometimes looking vulnerable is exactly what you want. The enemy eye would have calculated that no rational commander would deliberately put their ship in such a position. They would have assumed your engines were actually damaged and moved in to finish you off. And then we could have surprised them," another officer said slowly, beginning to understand. The training sessions continued day after day. Yoon-hee worked with the Alliance crews, teaching them to think in ways that went against centuries of their military doctrine. She showed them how to use solar flares to mask their movements, how to hide capital ships behind asteroid fields, and how to make their advanced vessels appear damaged or malfunctioning to lure in overconfident enemies. "Your ships are too perfect," she explained during one session. "Every movement is precisely calculated. Every formation is mathematically optimal. The enemy AI can predict exactly what you'll do because you always do the most logical thing." She brought up a historical display showing ancient Earth naval battles. "Look at how these old ships used smoke screens, weather conditions, and false flags to confuse their enemies. We need to adapt these concepts to space warfare." The Alliance engineers began modifying their ships under human guidance. They installed primitive but effective countermeasures that their advanced civilization had never considered necessary. Chaff dispensers confused enemy targeting systems. Electronic warfare suites disrupted the perfect communications that Vex forces relied on. Some ships were even fitted with physical armor plates, something the Alliance had abandoned centuries ago in favor of energy shields. Sometimes, Yoon-hee told them, the old ways work best. An energy shield can be calculated and predicted. A chunk of metal absorbing a hit. That creates chaos in their targeting algorithms. The most difficult lesson was teaching the Alliance crews to embrace unpredictability. They practiced making random course changes, deliberately flying into debris fields, and even shutting down their own systems at crucial moments. Every tactic was designed to confuse and disrupt the enemy's perfect calculations. "Your technology is not your enemy," Yoon-hee explained during a particularly frustrating session, "but you've become slaves to its efficiency. You need to learn when to override your combat computers, when to take manual control, when to do the illogical thing because it's the last thing the enemy will expect. Slowly, the Alliance crews began to understand. They learned to use solar radiation to create sensor shadows, to exploit gravitational fields for slingshot maneuvers that their own computers classified as highly inadvisable, and to fight in ways that no eye could easily predict. During one simulation, an Alliance cruiser completely shut down all systems, drifting dead in space, only to power up and unleash a devastating strike when the enemy moved in to investigate. In another, a fleet scattered in apparent panic, only to execute a perfectly timed converging attack that their combat computers had initially calculated as having a 0% chance of success. The best weapon, Yoon-hee reminded them, watching their growing confidence, is the one your enemy doesn't know you have. And right now, our best weapon is unpredictability. The Alliance officers began to show real enthusiasm for these new tactics. They suggested their own modifications, combining human strategic thinking with their advanced technology in ways neither civilization had imagined before. "We're creating something new here," Yoon-hee told her superior officers during a progress report. "Not just human tactics or Alliance technology, but a hybrid way of warfare that takes the best of both." As she watched the latest training exercise, where Alliance ships performed maneuvers that would have been considered insane just weeks ago, Yoon-hee felt a surge of pride. These advanced beings had set aside their prejudices and embraced human thinking, creating something entirely new in the process. The Vex, with their perfect logic and predictable patterns, wouldn't know what hit them. Sometimes, the colonel reflected, the best way to fight the future was with lessons from the past. The red dwarf star of Proxima Centauri cast a crimson glow across the assembled fleet. Commander Do-hyun Park stood on the bridge of the Alliance flagship Swift Thunder, watching as the combined human Alliance fleet moved into their seemingly chaotic positions. To any observer, it would have looked like their formation was falling apart before the battle even began. That was exactly what Do-hyun wanted the Vex to think. "Vex fleet detected," his sensor officer announced. "Multiple capital ships emerging from fold space. They're moving into their standard attack pattern." Do-hyun smiled. The Vex were so predictable, so logical in their approach. Their ships emerged in perfect geometric formations, their spacing mathematically precise. Their battle computers would already be calculating the most efficient ways to destroy what appeared to be a disorganized enemy fleet. "All ships, execute Operation Thunderstorm," Do-hyun ordered. The crews, both human and Alliance, had drilled these maneuvers countless times. They knew exactly what to do, even though their movements would appear random to the enemy. The Vex fleet advanced, their silver ships gleaming in the red starlight. Their first volley of energy weapons lanced out, targeting where they predicted the Alliance ships would be. But the Alliance vessels weren't there. Instead of following logical evasion patterns, they moved in ways that defied conventional space combat doctrine. "Chaos," Do-hyun murmured, watching his plan unfold. "Pure chaos." Small groups of ships deliberately flew into asteroid fields, using the space debris as cover. Others shut down their engines completely, drifting like dead vessels until the perfect moment to strike. Some flew directly into the Vex formation's blind spots, positions that were theoretically vulnerable, but that the Vex had never needed to defend because no logical opponent would attack there. The Vex battle computers struggled to adapt. Their perfect formations began to show signs of strain as they encountered tactics their logic couldn't predict. When they adjusted to defend against one unusual attack pattern, the Alliance forces would switch to something completely different. "Group 7, execute Feint Beta," Do-hyun ordered. A squadron of ships broke away, appearing to flee in panic. The Vex, calculating a 98% chance of victory against these retreating vessels, diverted ships to pursue. They didn't realize they were being drawn into a carefully prepared trap. Hidden behind the system's largest gas giant, the rest of Group 7 waited. When the pursuing Vex ships passed the planned coordinate, the hidden vessels emerged, catching the enemy in a devastating crossfire. The Vex ships, their shields optimized for frontal assault, fell quickly to attacks from unexpected angles. The battle continued for hours. The Vex tried to adapt, but every time they thought they had decoded the pattern in the Alliance's movements, that pattern would dissolve into something new. Human unpredictability combined with Alliance technology created a fighting force unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Main Vex flagship is showing signs of confusion, the tactical officer reported. Their formation is breaking down. They're trying to regroup, but they can't predict where our next attack will come from. Do-hyun watched as the mighty Vex fleet, undefeated for so long, began to crumble. Their perfect formations, disrupted by unconventional attacks, lost their geometric precision. Their coordinated firing solutions, based on predictive algorithms, missed more often than they hit as Alliance ships, moved in ways no computer could anticipate. Launch the final phase, Do-hyun ordered. Every ship in the Alliance fleet suddenly killed their engines, appearing to drift powerless in space. The Vex, their computers calculating this as a massive system failure, moved in for the kill. That's when every Alliance ship simultaneously activated their newly installed electromagnetic pulse generators. The massive energy wave washed over the Vex fleet, temporarily disrupting their perfectly synchronized battle network. In those precious few seconds of confusion, the Alliance fleet struck from all directions at once. The battle was over in minutes. The Vex fleet, for the first time in known history, retreated in disarray. Their remaining ships vanished into fold space, leaving behind the wreckage of their defeated companions. As the red light of Proxima Centauri illuminated the aftermath of humanity's first victory against the Vex, Do-hyun received status reports from his fleet. The losses had been minimal, far lower than any previous engagement with the Vex. "Send word to Alliance Command," he ordered. "The Proxima Centauri system is secure. More importantly, we've proven that the Vex can be beaten. They just needed to face an enemy that thinks like humans." Looking out at his victorious fleet, Do-hyun knew this was just the beginning. The Vex would adapt, try to find patterns in this new way of fighting. But humans were masters of adaptation too. They would keep changing, keep evolving their tactics, keep embracing chaos as their natural element. The tide of war had finally turned. Fleet Admiral Jae-yun Choi stood before the massive holographic display aboard her command ship, Lightning Strike, watching red dots representing Vex supply convoys moving through their territory. After their defeat at Proxima Centauri, the Vex had doubled their security, but they still moved supplies in predictable, efficient patterns. That predictability would be their downfall. "Operation Thunderstorm is ready to begin," her executive officer reported. "All strike groups are in position." Jae-yun nodded, her eyes never leaving the display. The combined human Alliance fleet had been divided into small, fast-moving groups. Each was equipped with both modified Earth vessels and advanced Alliance ships, creating a hybrid force that defied standard tactical analysis. "Launch Phase 1, she ordered. "All groups, you have your targets. Strike fast, strike hard, and vanish before they can respond." Across 20 different sectors of space, Alliance strike groups emerged from hiding. Some had been lurking in asteroid fields, others had been drifting with powered-down systems, appearing as space debris to Vex sensors. They struck simultaneously at Vex supply convoys, using tactics that would have been familiar to Earth's ancient guerrilla fighters. The first wave of attacks was devastatingly successful. Vex escorts, their combat computers trying to find patterns in the chaos, couldn't coordinate an effective defense. By the time they began to adapt, the Alliance forces had already vanished, leaving burning wreckage in their wake. "Phase 1 complete," Jae-yun announced. "Casualty reports." "Minimal losses," her tactical officer reported. "The Vex are already adjusting their convoy routes and increasing escort strength." Jae-yun smiled. "Exactly as expected. Begin Phase 2. The second wave of attacks was completely different from the first. Instead of quick strikes and retreats, Alliance forces now used modified Earth vessels as bait, appearing vulnerable to lure Vex ships into carefully prepared traps. When Vex commanders, their algorithms calculating a high probability of success, moved to engage these seemingly easy targets, they found themselves caught in complex ambushes. They're trying to adapt their combat algorithms, the tactical officer reported. But every time they think they've found a pattern, we switch tactics. Hour after hour, the operation continued. Each new phase used different strategies, different attack patterns, different combinations of ships and weapons. The Vex, for the first time in their history, faced an enemy whose actions they couldn't predict or analyze. During one engagement, Earth ships deliberately flew into an ion storm, a tactic the Vex computers classified as suicide. But the humans had modified their shields based on old submarine technology, allowing them to emerge from the storm unharmed and attack from an impossible angle. In another sector, Alliance ships used old Earth wolf pack tactics, hunting in small groups that coordinated their attacks in ways that seemed random but were actually carefully planned. The Vex lost entire convoys before they could even identify which attacks were feints and which were real threats. The Vex are pulling their forces back, Jai Yun's intelligence officer reported. They're trying to establish new supply routes through safer territories. No territory is safe now, Jai Yun responded. Begin Phase 4. The fourth phase was perhaps the most audacious. Alliance forces began targeting Vex communication relays and sensor networks, using methods inspired by Earth's historical resistance movements. Small ships would appear to malfunction near Vex installations, then detonate electromagnetic pulse devices that corrupted vast amounts of Vex data. Their entire logistics network is in chaos, the tactical officer reported with satisfaction. They can't coordinate their responses effectively anymore. Jai Yun watched as more red dots disappeared from her display. The Vex, who had seemed invincible just months ago, were now scrambling to protect their supply lines. Their perfect efficiency had become their greatest weakness. They simply couldn't adapt fast enough to an enemy that refused to follow logical patterns. Message from Earth Command, her communications officer announced. They're sending congratulations. The Vex have lost more resources in the past 24 hours than in the previous year of conventional warfare. Jai Yun nodded, but her mind was already on the next phase. The Vex would try to adapt, would attempt to find patterns in their seemingly random attacks. But they would fail, because there was no pattern to find. Each new phase of Operation Thunderstorm used different tactics, different strategies, different combinations of forces. Prepare for Phase 5. She ordered. And remember, the moment they think they know what we're going to do next, do something completely different. As she watched her forces prepare for the next wave of attacks, Jai Yun reflected on how far they had come. The Alliance had learned to embrace human unpredictability, while humans had learned to use Alliance technology in ways its creators had never imagined. Together, they had created something entirely new. A way of warfare that combined the best of both civilizations. And against this hybrid force, even the mighty Vex were beginning to falter. The counterattack had begun, and there would be no stopping it now. The Vex home system blazed with weapons fire as the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history moved into position. General Seong Min Ryu stood at the command center of the massive Alliance flagship, Victory's Dawn, watching as thousands of ships took their seemingly random positions around the system's central star. The Vex home fleet waited in their characteristic perfect formation, a geometric pattern that would have been beautiful if it wasn't so predictable. Their last line of defense, protecting their homeworld, and its vast network of computer cores that coordinated their entire civilization. All battle groups report ready, Seong Min's tactical officer announced. The Vex are scanning us, but their algorithms can't determine our attack pattern. Seong Min smiled grimly. That's because there isn't one. Begin Operation Final Storm. The battle began with complete silence. Every Alliance ship shut down their main systems simultaneously, appearing to suffer a massive system failure. The Vex, their sensors detecting this apparent vulnerability, began to advance in perfect attack formations. That's when the first trap was sprung. Hidden behind the system's gas giant, Earth's contribution to the fleet emerged. Ships equipped with modified versions of ancient nuclear weapons. Not for destruction, but for their electromagnetic pulses. The detonations created a web of energy disruption that threw the Vex battle computers into confusion. Phase 2, Seong Min ordered. Show them everything we've learned. The combined fleet burst into action. Some ships used old Earth submarine tactics, hiding in the solar plasma streams. Others employed Alliance technology in ways its creators had never imagined, using gravitational slingshots to achieve impossible attack angles. Each battle group fought differently, using tactics that ranged from ancient to ultra-modern. The Vex tried to adapt, but their entire warfare doctrine was based on finding patterns and countering them. Against an enemy that refused to show any patterns, their sophisticated battle computers began to fail. The more they tried to analyze the chaos, the more their perfect formations broke down. On the bridge of the command ship, Admiral Dae-ho Park watched alongside Council Member Hae-Nul Kim. Their faces reflected the flashes of battle as human ingenuity combined with Alliance technology to create something entirely new. "Look at how they're fighting," Hae-Nul said softly. "No logic, no pattern, yet every move has a purpose. We thought they were primitive because they still used physical weapons and armor. We didn't understand that they had mastered the art of war itself." The battle raged for hours. The Vex, for the first time fighting in their home system, found themselves facing tactics they had never encountered. Earth ships deliberately flew into their firing solutions, taking hits on reinforced armor to open paths for Alliance weapons. Alliance vessels used their advanced technology in ways that defied their own operational parameters. "Their main computer core is exposed," Seong Min announced. "All groups, execute final strike." What followed was a masterpiece of coordinated chaos. Each battle group attacked differently, some using direct assault, others employing deception and feints. The Vex, unable to predict where the real threat would come from, couldn't coordinate their defenses effectively. The massive Vex flagship, a crystalline structure larger than an Earth city, finally raised surrender signals as its computer core went dark. Around it, the remaining Vex fleet, cut off from their central coordination network, began powering down their weapons. "Victory confirmed," Seong Min's tactical officer reported, his voice thick with emotion. "The Vex home fleet is surrendering. Their primary computer network has been isolated. The war is over." On the command bridge, humans and Alliance members stood together, watching as surrender signals spread through the Vex fleet. After centuries of seeming invincible, the perfect logic of the Vex had fallen to human unpredictability combined with Alliance technology. "We thought they were primitive," Hae-Nul repeated, looking at the human officers around her. "We were wrong. They weren't primitive. They were experienced. They knew war in ways we never could." Admiral Park nodded. "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. The Vex forgot something that humans never could. War isn't about perfection. It's about adaptation, about doing the unexpected, about turning weakness into strength." As the combined fleets secured their historic victory, Seong Min reflected on how this impossible achievement had come about. The Alliance had sought help from a primitive species, only to discover that what they saw as primitive was actually experience in its purest form. The war was over. The galaxy would never be the same. And perhaps, Seong Min thought as he watched humans and Alliance members celebrating together, that was the greatest victory of all.